So now we are heading to the final panel related to a combination of CEO and corporate startup and corporate CEOs in believe that will result in a better return of investment. As you all know, there are two types of CEOs: startup CEOs, corporate CEOs, wearing a different hats and doing a different things. In the startup world, there are no fixed procedures or rules, even though might be debatable. In corporate world, there are such rules. But the key question is, can two different types of CEOs learn something from each other? Second question is, can corporate CEOs apply some procedures or lessons from the startup CEOs? And there are many other questions, but at least to these two, our distinguished speakers will try to give the best answers. The moderator of this panel is a fellow member of WBAF, Mr. Roger Colantes, a former director of the Asia Pacific Learning and Development Center of Citibank. Roger, please, the floor is yours. Coming from Philippines, then Denise Misir, Family Officer, B22, Turkey. Denise, welcome. Sorry. Gordana Nikolic, which apparently is not in the room at the moment, but hopefully she will join. She's a founder of PAR University College and Business Academy of Rijeka. Oh, you're instead. She will be represented by this. Oh, well, good. Grow City. Ante Tony Debelic. Okay, very good. Welcome. And Yemi Keri, co-founder of Rising Tide Africa, coming from Nigeria. The floor is yours. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we have exactly 30 minutes because at 5:30 there will be announcement of startups and beginning of the closing ceremony. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Roger Colliantes. I'm moderating this very exciting panel. First, I want to say thank you for those who stayed. Sorry for those who left. The reason is because what you didn't know is the best they put at last, at the end. So the best is yet to come. So I'm very pleased to moderate this topic, which is very exciting, very close to our hearts. The proposition being that smart CEO from well-established company, let's call them multi-million dollar corporation. The theory is if you put this person together with a young upstart pioneer founder, it will enhance the ability to get more better return for your investment. Now, obviously, we here represent different sides of that proposition. Some of us were used to be CEOs of multinational corporation who became startup founders ourselves and become accelerator of founders. There is also someone who's very interesting is someone who's actually a founder. He's from Croatia, Anthony Develic, right? Uh, he's replacing Miss Nobilic. So it's almost like sounds the same, right? Okay. All right. So the question I want to ask is therefore, and our proposition is, what's the value of putting all these two talents together? What happens when you synergize both? And even more exciting is what happens when you transition the same person who is stiff in a culture of corporate and you make him an investor. What do you think are the things he has to unlearn? And then even better, when you become accelerator of startups, what does he bring to the table? So it's a little bit twist of the proposition. So I'd like to introduce our panel, and they will give a 3-minute background of that transition and why they are very excited to share today. So let's start with Yemi Keri from the Rising Tide, okay, of Africa. Yes,
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here today. Um, I would say I have sat in all three areas. First of all, I'll just give a background and you understand why I say so. Um, in my past life, I worked at SAP. I mean, I worked in a couple of other places before coming to SAP. And I worked with SAP and I grew SAP from in Nigeria itself, and also then became the regional manager for West Africa, for both Anglophone and Francophone. So the, 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 the experience there comes in very handy. Um, with SAP, there was structure. So there was back end structure. There were people that would do implementation. There were people that would do the sales. There would be, so you have a full structure surrounding your operations, as it were. From SAP, I went into the public sector. So I was in SAP for about 7 years, and then I went into the public sector. And the public sector, what my responsibility was that I was to ensure that the government, so it was a state government of Nigeria, which is like a province or in other countries, and they wanted to leverage on technology to deliver the business of the state. And so I transitioned there, and it was a different ball game, basically because the mindset and the culture of the public servant is totally different from that of a director of the private sector. So for me, there was a major learning there, and I had to, you know, come in and take the learnings from the private sector and try and implement same in the public sector. Difficult as it was, but we had to do it, and we had to do it with a paradigm shift of the capacity, and also training and retraining the talents that were there. Because innately from me, it was I had an opportunity to create something using the latest of technologies at the time. And so it was entrepreneurial in a system in the public sector. After doing that, for about 6 years, I decided I wanted to go back to the private sector. And in doing that for 1 year, it was as if I was confined in my own space. So it was no longer, I couldn't see the private sector, the structured organization in which I was, in allowing me to express as an entrepreneur or as an IT developer professional in that space anymore. So the structure which I relied on and which I grew up in SAP now became somehow of a deterrent for my expression as an entrepreneur. And so I ventured out on my own and decided to start my own IT information technology firm. And so that's what I do. But while doing that, I went through the process of entrepreneur, and also an entrepreneur again. And then I began to see and appreciate entrepreneurs in themselves, because it's a totally different ball game when you're doing it on your own. Um, and as such, I then decided that I needed to help other entrepreneurs, and I started the Rising Tide Africa, which was birthed out of Lagos Angel Network. So it's a group of female angel investors coming together to mentor, to invest, to share their network to other entrepreneurs. Why did I do that? As a part of the Lagos Angel Network, I realized that the women were not getting funded. Basically, because maybe their approach to how they pitched, maybe because of their support structure was not in place, or other things. And so, as a test run, I started taking the women that were going to come and pitch back, and then we'll coach them and mentor them, and then bring them back, and then they'll be funded. So I'll stop here for now, so that you can others can have them.
Thank you very much for the sharing. I think we have to Thank you very much for the sharing, because that gives us a glimpse of what happens when a technology professional converts to become a disruptor of the public sector and now become full-fledged entrepreneur and then building an ecosystem community of similar entrepreneurs and disruptors. So that's quite a journey. How about Denise? Sorry.
I have a bit of a similar background in the way that I have, if I go back to how I started, I was always passionate in the world of investments. As I mentioned to you today, at the age of 18, I knew I wanted to do that. My purpose, my passion was in the world of investments. And the way I've done it was a little bit in line with how you have done it. It started with becoming a professional first, then becoming kind of an entrepreneur within a public institution, and then upon that entrepreneurship within a public institution, really becoming like a disruptor of the public sector in such a way. I've done that together with our teams. We've established a total new agency within the public sector specifically for Turkey, and we have had a lot of success. I've enjoyed both the entrepreneurial becoming to a next level committed way. We have done at the time. Having said that, you know, this passion in me is the fire in your heart that, you know, continues, that makes you want to explore the potential for the further well-being that you can create. That's how, in a nutshell, my experience. So after the public institution where I have had a chance to lead, I have stepped back and I established my own company, V22, in 2013. The entrepreneurship was a very courageous decision for me at the time. I've more or less, you know, thrown myself into the sea, but I decided at the time that I needed this experience, not only for me, but I also decided that I owed it to the value creation promise that I had given to myself. I think that is what differentiates entrepreneurs from, you know, corporate CEOs, because I believe that the passion and the purpose that we find internally comes from inside of us. We know it, we are born with it, we associate with it. Whereas for a corporate CEO that leads a multinational company, it is more or less given. It's, you know, the organization has come to a certain level. The CEO, of course, has associated with that mission of the company and finds himself there. Having said that, it comes from an externality, and the CEO's job is to internalize that and to reflect that back into the performance of the company and the delivery of the results and the strategy making that is needed. So after establishing V22 as an entrepreneur in 2013, I continued my journey. First 5 years, I was more or less like a single family officer with the first three big clients, serving them. Then I said in 2019, Deniz, you have established a company, you work like a professional to your clients, so why did you establish the company? So this is maybe an important sharing for my fellow women entrepreneurs, because it was only in year 6 that I said, I need to change it. I owe it to my own family capital and to myself that I need to do things differently, like a startup does. So that's part of the shift. So I started to have a shift of paradigm, and I said, okay, from entrepreneurship, advisory business, what can you do next? And then we have come up with this idea of go to market. We are still working on it, so I cannot share the whole details with you. But having said that, last 2 years we've been engaged in a totally new initiative together with some of my fellow partners from the world. We've been doing a lot of the, you know, this additional work that a startup CEO normally does. And I've been following my unicorn friends, talking to them, learning from them. And example has been that I met, for instance, Pradeep Gul recently, who has been a multinational corporation CEO for 20 years. Then he establishes his startup. And in 3 years, the valuation of the company is nearly $160 million. Okay, nearly by the end of this year, he has single-digit $1 million of revenue. So how do they do that? Okay, I'm not there yet. Hopefully, in the next World Business Angel Forum, we will discuss that. But learning from those guys who have come from the multinational CEO, who transitioned to startup CEO, who are now building their unicorns, I asked them, how did you manage? And they tell me, Deniz, what is important is that the CEO keeps the instinct and the vibe alive while learning the systems and the rules needed from a normal corporate CEO. So, like, either you find a way to synergize this together, or you find a way to learn from a former role and to expand together with that role. So that would be my main takeaway from this for this first part. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I think you have proven the adage that there's life after corporate. And in fact, about even more exciting, because what you bring to the table is your experience from corporate, but now in a different context. Corporate where you do everything, the vision is there, you catch the dream, and you just hope everything that you've learned in the corporate will still apply. Let's take a look at the other side of the fence. So, first startup, young, 19-year-old, Anthony Devilich. Do you believe everything we said here? Like, do we add value to you? And more particularly, my question is, what do you see as the value when you get a CEO like these two powerful ladies? And what does it add to you? And what do you add to them? Is that okay? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so as you said, from the other side of the perspective, as a founder, first time founder, only 3 years of experience since founding the company, I can tell throughout the start of the journey, one of the most valuable things that I've learned from CEOs, business angels, but most importantly, managers who've been operating in private entities for a while is just a misconception that first-time founders have about startups and what it is like to run a company. So daily operational things such as hiring, firing, managing resources, finance, doing reports, doing tenders, such things that might seem so daily and so normal for CEOs can present a huge barrier for first-time founders because it's the first time they do it, and especially if it's at a large B2B or B2G level where you're dealing with multinational companies or you're dealing with governments, and all of a sudden you have a stack of paper in front of you and you don't know a single word inside of it. So I just think first-time entrepreneurs can learn a lot from CEOs just by shadowing them, just by learning how their day looks like, and actually understanding the discipline and the diligence and the daily focus that goes into their everyday schedule. Because as a first-time founder and being a millennial and being a young teenager who started a company in the age of information, we are used to having all information at the tips of our fingers, and so we believe kind of childishly that we can Google everything, and unfortunately we can't. That's what, through my 3 years of experience, I've learned tremendously from CEOs and also business angels who give you such a experience. And it's, of course, as everyone always says, it's kind of cliche, but youth and experience always goes best together, and I truly believe that. And in my journey so far, where we come from a small high school competition as only an idea, then quitting high school, but transferring to an online school, not going to classes, not having a regular teenager life, as you might call it. The most important thing that I learned was handling day-to-day operations and actually giving the twist between a structured and organized company or corporation and youthfulness and agility and a new perspective that a startup offers. So I believe that's one of the most important things I've learned so far.
I think that's a very profound, insight from someone as young as you. And I think obviously you were probably mentored or coached by someone who's probably smart, you know? Okay. It could be one of the ladies beside me, okay? So let me do one more round. The question now is, now you are successful CEOs, develop your own startups, then help other startups. What did you learn as a result of this process? Because the key here is transitioning, like WBAF, we're encouraging, you know, corporate guys to help build the economy, inclusive and so on. Now that you have gone through that process of transforming, remodeling, redefining your call and your career, what will be your takeaways? What did you learn? One or two things that you learn now that you didn't know when you were in corporate.
Okay, one or two things. You know, I was in the other session, in the other room, and there was talk about learning and unlearning. That is very key, because you're coming from a perspective of having it all structured for you and going out alone to a field where you have to take lessons learned from the corporate section and try and implement it by yourself. So you're putting in structures around you, which is very important. Like he said, you know, I can empathize with him because you have to then move away, you know, add on and a perspective of making sure that although your eyes are on the product or the service you're providing, you must also put your eyes on the daily operations and all the supporting services. So that is one key thing as an entrepreneur coming, transitioning, be ready to expand the scope of your responsibility. Yeah, so that is one thing. The other thing that I have learned is that, you know, it's like in the corporates you are KPIs. You need to bring in the numbers in the market. You need to deliver this. You need to do that. All of those things are more like without a feel. So you either deliver or you lose your bonus or you without a feel. And for me as an entrepreneur, I realized that while I'm doing all of these responsibilities, I shouldn't forget my team because of the experience which I had. And so I have taken to it to go to the next level and try and see beyond the face of my team and what they're delivering, what what I can take off them. You know, for instance, come to work for with 2 hours in traffic a day, you know, Nigeria. And then I was thinking, what can I do? So for my team, I've gotten a place close to the office. So to take that burden off them so that they can focus more on the productivity of it. So I try and nurture my team as much as possible. Those are the two things I can.
Shall we go to Denise? What were we sound the insights?
Oh, sorry. When I was leading this public institution, my experience was, you know, translating our resources to goals we had defined as an institution, right? But I was sort of taking these resources for granted, I realized. When I started as an entrepreneur, because as an entrepreneur, my job is to remake those resources available. And that gives me an opportunity because looking back, I've realized that some of our resources, let's say our tech, let's say our CRM, let's say our value creation system that didn't work well. So that gives me the opportunity to recreate from a shifted point of view. Having said that, for me to be able to create this new resource, I need to have the resource of the financial capital back. So that there's a dilemma of going and coming back. That you learn as an entrepreneur that is your biggest job. You know, out of the pros and the cons and the different business modalities and the strategies and the financial capital needs and the team building options, where do you go first? So I believe that as an entrepreneur, you become so muscled after a certain level of experience that you can fit in anywhere. You know, you can go back to the corporate, and you can be the one to make the resource allocation and use more efficient and better. And second, if I don't have time left, I think that's one of my key messages that I want to share. I became very young when I was leading I was very young. I was 32. I was leading an international public institution. And, you know, everyone was like, okay, Deniz so young, what does she do? And I was still, I feel that at the age of 36, 35, I established my company. Um, I feel that I've done it still late, if you know what I mean. I should have done it earlier. So I believe that all these roles, they are different roles, okay? Like, it doesn't matter if it's the corporate role or the entrepreneur role, the other one role. I think we should start all these roles as early as we can, and we should have a real chance to experience, and we should learn and sometimes unlearn, and based on where our heart uh, lies, we should go create that value that is in line with that. So that is my major message.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Before we turn to Anthony again, let me just share quickly because I could resonate with what you experienced. I used to be with the bank. I stayed too long in the bank. And finally, when I decided I'm going to be myself, I found out that I wanted to be a startup. But before I start investing in startup, I have to be a startup myself. So I set up a brick and mortar. It's a neuroscience-based preschool. I did smarter robotics for kids. And then I went higher, scaled up, and I went into AI. I distribute humanoid robotics, robots now for service. And then I went to IoT, build smart cities, and then now into esports. And then when I now know how to run a business, then I form my own accelerator program. And where I make the people I train, which are the founders, to train other founders. So that to me is the one of the things I learned in this transitioning from corporate to entrepreneur and then builder of entrepreneur. I have to give the last, the last say to our young, future of WBAF. I see you 10 years from now, taking over Baybar's job, So, so, I like to ask you, what are some of the things you want to remind us, like CEOs, coaches, what should we do to help you best?
I don't think Vibers would be happy with what you said. But as far as your question, I just believe with the experience that I've gathered talking to fellow founders and fellow millennials and young people and what I've actually learned from my experience is CEOs, angel investors, coaches, mentors should understand that young people have a different point of view, that we've been born with technology at our fingertips and all the information has always been available, and that's why we kind of have a bit of an optimistic view on everything that we do. But also being said, I think you should hold young people, young founders, especially to a higher standard. I think sometimes mentors, coaches, when they see an initiative, they see a young person, oh, he has an idea. Of course, you should applaud it, but also try to keep them to a higher standard because I feel just like in today's startup culture, raising money is something that is celebrated. It is a path into business success. It's not the end goal. So raising money shouldn't be the time where you light up candles and you party and everyone's happy. Raising money is a part of the process of building a big company. And I just feel like in today's world, everyone's so focused just running around, raising money. And I feel young entrepreneurs, especially young founders, often have that misconception about what business actually is and what the end goal is. And as I said, holding them to a higher standard, understanding that if you give them a business card and they say they will contact you and they don't after a week, you should critique them for that. If they say these are the forecasts, we will do this, we will do that, and they don't, you should hold them accountable for that, because I just feel like people my age, and especially first-time founders, aren't used to being held accountable, and all of a sudden they're in this quote-unquote position of power, and they feel like they have control over everything, but they don't hold themselves to that same standard, and they just feel like their team should be doing this and this, but they themselves often on the simplest things, like as I said, someone hands you out a business card, you say you'll get in touch, but you don't. It tells a lot about pattern recognition that you can expect throughout that startup. So if those things start to continue to happen, it's a pattern that I would try to avoid. But definitely, and also watch out, how does the young person perceive your critique. So if they try to be defensive or try to run away from it, I would definitely encourage people who fail often but learn from their mistakes, and young startup founders that can be able to learn from their mistakes and take their critique with strong heart and motivation to move forward and learn, I think are the best ones.
Thank you very much. And team, as I promise you, the best is the last, right? So I think you have to give a big hand to our panel for such a wonderful, very educational, and I would like to say thought-provoking session. And thank you for staying. We rewarded your time. Thank you so much. And to our moderator, okay, who stayed the whole day. Okay, thank you guys.